If you've been following the tariff news, then you know next week Trump is set to put tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And this has caused quite a bit of panic in the stock market. On Friday of last week, the market went down quite a bit. And then on Monday, the market also went down quite a bit, which is showing that the rest of the United States understands what tariffs are, but Trump still doesn't seem to have a clue what a tariff actually is. If you're watching this, you probably also understand that the tariff is not put on China or Mexico or Canada, but the tariff is put on US businesses. They're the ones who have to pay it. And there is a place for tariffs, right? They are a useful tool if they are properly implemented. But the way that Trump is going about these tariffs is so baffling. It's so confusing. And it seems so pointless. So I kind of want to talk about it because I'm not going to talk about tariffs, but I'm kind of wanting to think about the bigger picture of what is going on and kind of my opinion on it. And so we have this expression in English that you attract more flies with honey. And the idea is if you want to have a lot of friends, if you want to attract people, if you want to attract flies, then you give them what they want, right? So if you want allies, if you want friends, then you have to provide value to those allies. And the United States and Canada specifically have been allies pretty much since the founding of those nations. And I don't think there has been any real war between the United States and Canada. I don't think so. I can't think of any conflict between Canada and the United States. And the United States and Canada are like the biggest trading partners. And the North America Free Trade Act, I think it was revised to some other name when Trump was in office. But the North America Free Trade Act was one of the most successful trade pacts in like the history of the world, essentially. And so I don't understand why Trump specifically, because this is Trump's doing, why you would attack your ally. Like, just why would you do that? I can understand attacking China from his perspective and from the United States perspective. I can totally understand that. I understand the trade war and what he was hoping to achieve during his first presidency. And I understand that he's going to go after China again this presidency and start to create more economic pressure and just more problems for both countries. If you see China as the enemy, then it makes sense to try to stop your enemy. But no one in the history of the United States or Canada has seen the other country as an enemy. It has the longest unprotected border in the world because there's no need to protect it. There is no animosity towards each other. They aren't enemies. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So in a time when the United States appears to be declining globally, and it's not just in the last couple of weeks, we're talking about a series of perceived decline. And this basically goes back to Bush, Jr., W. Bush, and goes back to the events that happened in 2001. So 2001, there was an attack in New York, and then the United States invaded Afghanistan and then later invaded Iraq. And there has been kind of a gradual decline since then. I mean, you could go back to when the United States went off the gold standard and say that's really when the money supply changed, and that's when inflation started to become a greater problem, and when the United States went away from real money to fake money, which is, printing, which allowed them to get into debt. But basically, the United States has been on a decline for 30, 40 years. Pretty much my whole life. There wasn't a point in time that I was alive and thinking about, politics in the world and thought, the United States is really strong and on an upward trajectory. You could say that in the 80s, the United States kind of peaked out, and it's going to be a gradual, or it should be a gradual decline over the rest of, this century for about 100 years before a new power truly takes over. And that's kind of the way empires go. They don't fall overnight. They gradually decay until there's a tipping point when everybody says, okay, we're not going to trust their currency. We're not going to really trust them. Oftentimes it's a war that they lose to a rising power, and then that kind of marks the end of their empire. You could say that UK's empire kind of started its gradual decline when the United States broke free. They were embroiled in a lot of different wars, and they had about 100 years in the 18th century when they were still kind of the dominant power, but you could see it was declining, and then World War I, World War II kind of ended it, with the United States being the rising power. And that's gone on for, 100 plus years, and now it's on its tail end and starting to decline. So when you're in a position like that, as an empire, it makes no sense to alienate your allies. The allies that are helping to keep you afloat. The allies that are the ones that might actually help you revive your empire, or at least allow it to gracefully sunset, versus, fall off a cliff. Because if this new Trump, tariff war goes on against our allies now, like, it's okay if it's against your enemies to some extent. Like, you can understand that. It's just baffling, because tariffs work by making the business in your country. So the business in the United States who's importing stuff from China now has to pay more for those goods. And that's the tariff. They pay that to the U.S. government. And the U.S. government collects that money, and then they have revenue. They can do whatever they want with it. The U.S. business has to pay more, which means they push those costs onto the consumers, and then the consumers have to pay more. So Americans are going to have to pay more for all the goods coming from China. If you put tariffs on Mexico and you put tariffs on Canada, then you're going to have to pay more for all those goods too coming in. And then that's pretty much your three biggest trading partners right there. And so the idea is American businesses will then start building things in the United States again. But that's not how that works. One, it takes forever to reinvest and start up a factory and really move forward with that in the United States. And two, why would you not just shift it to Cambodia, Bangladesh, India, or somewhere else where the labor is still cheap? The United States, you're still paying too much for labor. That's the whole reason that they offshored most of their manufacturing, because they said it costs too much to produce in the United States. If you put crazy tariffs on the entire world, 100, 200%, then it'll be cheaper to produce in the United States, but you won't have any allies anymore. On top of that, the way production works isn't you produce a single product, right? I think Trump looks at a television and says, this is what the United States is selling, a television. So let's make that television here. Instead of looking at all the parts that go into it, the chips, the electronics, the copper for wiring, the screen, everything, the glass, everything that is being made outside of the United States. So even if a company decided to make the television in the United States, they would still have to import all those parts, all those components to assemble and build it in the United States. And then it's no longer cheap because you have a tariff. You can't buy the rare earth minerals from China because it's too expensive. So even if you put a 5,000% tariff on every country in the world other than the United States, It would still cost too much because the way the world works now is not that a single product is built in one factory from start to finish. That's not how it works. Things are built at different stages. So a factory in China builds one of the electronic components. And then once they're done building that, they send it to another factory who attaches their electronic component to it. And then they send it to another factory. And on top of that, all the raw materials, the very basic stuff like the metal in the silicon, in the glass, and whatever you need to build things don't get made in the same factory. It's not an all-in-one thing. So the fact that he is putting tariffs on countries doesn't mean that those businesses will now produce it in the United States. They'll just go to the next cheapest place, which is probably somewhere else in Asia or possibly Africa or, anywhere else, wherever it's cheaper. It doesn't matter where. You'll just get it from the next cheapest source, and the next cheapest source will not be the United States because, again, if there's tariffs on importing raw materials from China or components from China, then it'd still be better to go to Cambodia and assemble it there and then just import the final product from Cambodia. Because from China to Cambodia, where you're buying the raw resources, you'll buy them from China, ship them to Cambodia, assemble it in Cambodia, and then send it to, the United States. That will still be cheaper than trying to build it in the United States. So this whole concept of tariffs in attacking your allies is so baffling to me. I just don't get it. What is he hoping to accomplish? I mean, and he stated that he's hoping that businesses will come back to the United States, but they won't, because that's not how it works. Because we're a global economy now. We're not individual countries. It's a global economy. This is what globalism is. And globalization, this is what it is. It's not one country produces one thing and then another country produces another thing and then you can tariff it and force them to stop producing it and so you can produce it in your own country. It's just not how it works. And so I feel like it's just accelerating the fall of the empire, which, a lot of people around the world would cheer. And even to some extent, I'm kind of like, okay, let it go. I mean, this is what they picked. I talked about this in a previous video where I was talking about, I kind of was hopeful or kind of giddy that Trump got elected. But again, in that video, I'm going to say here, is the people suffer the most. You're not going to bring jobs back to the United States. Not enough for the amount of damage that you're going to cause. Maybe some factories will reshore onto the United States for whatever reason. Maybe they'll get tax breaks on top of, getting some of the costs down based, specifically on very specific things they might do. And this is why tariffs need to be specific and not broad. Because if you looked at it and said, okay, we could produce more, brake pads for cars, let's say something like that, in the United States. We could open up 3 factories in the United States for brake pads, buy American steel, and make American brake pads, and that would be maybe profitable. I don't know, just an example. Then that makes sense. Okay, put tariffs on 300% tariffs on anybody importing brake pads into the United States, and then those companies will be like, well, it makes more sense to make brake pads in the United States now. And then you start a factory for brake pads and you employ 500 people or, however many you need to make that product and distribute it. That's targeted. That makes sense. A broad tariff of 25% on all goods from every country that imports things to the United States, or reciprocal was what he was saying in his most recent, craziness. Just doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. I mean, it's so fascinating. Do you think there's a strategy behind this? And if you do think there's a strategy behind this, please explain it to me in a comment, and then explain if you think it actually will work. Because I don't, and attacking your allies in a perceived time of decline doesn't seem like a strategy to me. So I'm really curious what you guys think of the tariffs and the tariff wars that are happening or being threatened. Leave a comment below, and I would love to hear your thought on it, because It's so fascinating to me, specifically right now. And yeah, so strange. But yeah, that's all I have to say about it. Maybe I'll talk about it if they actually go through in a future video and talk about it more specifically. Leave a comment below, and I will see you in the next video.